What's going on, boys? It is day number 2 of reading through the book of Deuteronomy. We are going to be continuing from what we were covering yesterday from chapter 1, talking about the Israelites being led by Moses, going on to conquer the land of the Ammonites. And now we're going to be looking at what they are going to be facing as they begin this process of taking over the land. So this chapter is broken up into 2 sections. First one being titled Wanderings in the Wilderness, and then the second one about the defeat of Sihon, king of Heshbon, which we will get into here in just a little bit, about his kind of importance of why he is just a figure that is important to the Israelites at the time. So the first title is called The Wanderings in the Wilderness. Now, before we read any verses, I kind of want to talk about this one word, wilderness. I'm sure some of us have heard of this word before. Most notably, some of us have heard of the word about Jesus when he was sent into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and was tempted by the devil, the wilderness. And I think most of us could also think of the wilderness as just being like in the middle of nowhere, maybe being in the middle of the woods or being in the middle of just almost like nowhere, like the countryside almost. Like there's nothing inside. There's no, like barely any civilization or anything just to kind of live off of. It's just like in the middle of nowhere, like no man's land almost. And essentially that's what the Israelites were facing for 40 years, is they were led out of Egypt into the wilderness for 40 years. And so now they've gotten to the end of their 40 years, and now this is what God is telling them. He's saying, okay, he's like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to the Ammonites, and this is what I want you to do. This is what he says. Moses says to the Israelites. This is God speaking to Moses, and then Moses speaking to the Israelites. And this is what he says in verse 5. He says, do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. So I think the biggest question is like, well, why would the Israelites not want to inflict war? Like, they're going to conquer this land. Why would they not want to go with this kind of demanding charge towards them? And I think it's the reason why is because they've waited all this time, so, they really should be dependent on God. I wrote down, I said, remain faithful and trustworthy of God's command. It says, don't let your fleshly desires get the best of you. So another way of kind of looking at this is that, there's certain times in our lives where we've had to wait for something, whether it was waiting to hear back about a test score, or waiting to hear back from someone's text, or you're waiting to hear back about whether or not you got a job promotion, or whatever it is. And whenever you finally do hear back about it, there's 2 types of, feelings that you get. There's the feeling of excitement if it's something good, and then if it's something that you don't necessarily agree with, it's that feeling of anger, and sometimes it can be rage. And if you let this get the best of you, this can make things really bad. It can create some conflicts and some problems between you and a certain person or a certain, object, for say. But what you have to remember, especially reflecting back this passage, what the Israelites had to remember is that, they were led into the wilderness by God for 40 years to prepare them for the receiving of their promised land. And, it's very, very grateful to see what is said in verse 7, that how God doesn't forget, how God doesn't just let things just slip under the rug. He's always paying attention, always listening, and always remembering what he said in the past. Verse 7 says, the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He has watched over your journey through the vast wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, and you have not lacked anything. So what more of an encouragement is that, saying that, look, it's been a long time that you've been doing this. The Lord's like, I know it's been a long time. I know that you guys are tired. You're ready for something. I know. And I'm so grateful that you remain faithful, and you have been, really putting yourself out there. He's like, your dedication and your hard work have not gone unnoticed. It says, in time you will be rewarded for your work. So think of, you're working hard for something, you're seeking for something, ideally, if you want something really bad and you want to achieve a certain goal, you have to work really hard for it. That means you have to put in the dedication, put in the hard work, push yourself beyond limits you didn't even know you had. And sometimes these are limits that literally you didn't know you had. And that's the best part about it, is that that's where God notices. He notices that you're not only trying, but you are pushing yourself beyond measures that you did not know possible. So you can't even sit there and try and think about it. These are things that, when you finish something, you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, how in the world did I just do that? It's one of those 1 in a billion moments. You're like, how in the world did I just do that? Think of like the Dude Perfect videos and how they get those right. It's like a 1 in a million chance they get it. That's the kind of thing that we experience a lot, especially when putting our faith in God, is that some things happen in our lives that we just couldn't do on our own. And why else would it be that when we start believing in God and start putting our faith in Him and our trust in Him, that things start to happen? It only makes sense to prove that what He says is true. And what He says about going before us to fight these battle for us is very much true. And so the remainder of this passage kind of just talks about, their process of going about towards this country, and then comparing, the people that they're passing and this and that, to these different like tribes to an example. And it says they're comparing them to previous tribes, and one particular word that stood out to me was the word Anakite. Now, the word Anakite is actually a particular set of people that was described as they were very giant and huge, and that they were basically intense towards people, that people were afraid of them. And I almost think of it as, well, what if we're like the Anakites? What if we can be like the Anakites? But instead of being intimidating towards people, we can be encouraging towards them. I had this, I think I shared this the other day, but I had this conversation with one of my buddies that I work out with pretty frequently. And he told me after we finished a set of doing, using kettlebells, he's like, man, that's encouraging. He's like, you're so encouraging. Like, you're not intimidating or anything. And I was like, well, I said, I'd rather be encouraging than intimidating, because if you're intimidating, most of the time you're like, do this, do that. You're pointing, with the point in your finger, that's what it is. But in reality, it's about being encouraging. You don't want to be intimidating, because then you start to really irritate people, and then you start to create some conflicts and some war. And that's kind of what's happening in a lot of ways of the world today. But jumping back to where we were, Moses and the Israelites were becoming very, very, feared of. They were becoming so powerful because God was speaking to Moses directly, and Moses was this very powerful prophet that everybody, wanted to meet, everybody wanted to listen to, everybody wanted to hear about. And, we get to hear, something great here in the next couple of chapters. We get to hear some great things about what God is giving Moses to do. And so this brings us to the second section about today's chapter, talking about the defeat of Sihon, king of Heshbon. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. So this man is the king of Heshbon, which is he's the king of the Ammonites. So this is the land that God has called the Israelites to go into and to conquer and take over. So this is what it opens up with. It says, set out now and cross the Arnon Gorge. See, I have given into your hand Sihon the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his country. Begin to take possession of it and engage in him in battle. To this very day I will begin to put terror and fear of you and all the nations under heaven. They will hear reports of you and will tremble and be anguished because of you. So one thing I noticed right away was, obviously, I got very curious about where exactly that they were talking about this place. So I did a little research, and particularly on this Arnon Gorge. And it's referring to this Arnon River that separated the country of Arnon, or separated the two territories, these nations of, I can't remember the nations. Oh, the Ammonites and Moab. So another particular nation that has been mentioned a little bit. But anyway, it says that, Moses and Israelites were called to cross that and go into the territory of the Ammonites and to go and defeat this king. And, the first thought that I'm sure a lot of us get is like, well, how are we going to do that? Like, he's a king. Like, pretty sure he has like severe security, and, I don't think that's going to work out very well. But we have to remember that God has done all these things for them. He's delivered them. He's gone ahead and fought for them. So they remain faithful, and they go in, and they try to get in, but they refuse to be let in. And so then God comes in, and he basically frees up the king and makes him very vulnerable to be taken over. And so verses 31 through 33 says, the Lord said to me, this is him saying to Moses, he says, see, I have begun to deliver Sihon and his country over to you. Now begin to conquer and possess his land. When Sihon and all his army came out to meet us at the battle of Jahaz, the Lord our God delivered him over to us, and we struck him down together with his sons and his whole army. So one of the biggest takeaways from this is, when Moses and the Israelites tried to approach the king, he would not let them in. He refused to let them in. But when God noticed this and saw this, he said, okay. He's like, He's like, no. He's like, no. This is the land I promised to my people. And the king was handed over to Moses, and the king was defeated. And so the Israelites came in, took everything, and now they're in this land. And so there's some more of the land that's going to be mentioned tomorrow in tomorrow's chapter. I'm just glimpsing down and looking at chapter 3. I know that's for tomorrow, but I think the most important takeaway from this chapter is the word wilderness that we talked about at the beginning. The wilderness is constantly something that we're all stuck in a lot of times, and we're all being tempted, and a lot of us fall into sin. But this is, we have to remember that we have a great leader for us who is willing to guide us and show us the way. The one who was in the wilderness, did not sin, and basically relied only on God. He fasted also for 40 days. Although I know some of us can't even barely even fast for 40 minutes. I know fasting is a tough subject to talk about, but some things we just have to consider. And so that's where we will finish off today. I'm going to go ahead and read the daily prayer from the 365 Power Prayers for Men. We are on August 3rd, and today's title is about Go Before. And we're actually going to be looking at a verse from Deuteronomy, a little bit ahead of where we're going to be, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8. So we'll actually come back to this here in a few weeks to kind of break this down even more. It says, the Lord will go before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forget you. Do not be afraid and don't worry. Lord, I want to be brave when it comes to doing what you ask, and bold to speak what you want me to say. Fill my heart with your desires. Help me to surrender to you, and give me the words you want to share with the world. As I read your word, help my faith grow and increase my ability to explain the gospel. When someone questions you, I want to be able to defend you. I pray for your presence to be close to me, close enough that I can sense you surrounding me in the midst of a dark world. So the Lord is constantly going before you. He knows your life, and if he's telling you to do something, I think we should do it because he knows your life. And it's not like him saying, well, hey, I know your life, so you can't do that. Like, I know what you're going to do. And then he's like saying, hey, if you continue down this path, this is where you're going to end up. Go this way, to prevent yourself from falling into that particular sin or falling into that particular act with something or someone. And that is today's word. I hope that you guys have had a great Sunday, and I hope you guys have a great start to your week. Peace out, boys. See you soon.